My name is Trent Laurance. I'm 50 years old, live alone just outside Red Deer, Alberta, and until recently, I worked in strategic consulting for energy firms across Western Canada. Nothing wild, nothing mystical, just boardrooms, spreadsheets, and long drives between oil towns. That was before I got the invitation, before I found out the truth. It came in a gray envelope, no stamp, no return address, just my name in precise black ink. Inside was a single sheet of thick, matte paper. No logos, no greeting. Just a message, printed in what looked like typewriter font. We've been observing your pattern recognition work. You're invited to contribute to a private intelligence symposium. Non-disclosure required. Initial session, Calgary, May 14th, 6 p.m. Location disclosed upon RSVP. That was it. No company name, no pitch, no signature. I should have tossed it. But something about the wording, it bypassed my skepticism. My consulting work occasionally intersected with military contracts and predictive modeling, so I assumed it was a hush-hush, government-affiliated group. The invitation played on that instinct. So, I replied. I shouldn't have. They gave me coordinates, not an address. It led to a nondescript office building in Calgary's industrial belt, past the breweries and grain silos. Inside, a bored receptionist guided me to an elevator. I expected a briefing room. Instead, the elevator descended, far longer than it should have, and opened to a sleek subterranean space bathed in low amber light. No windows, no clocks. There were about 30 people seated already, all different ages and backgrounds. A young data scientist beside me. An older man who'd once worked in aerospace. A woman who ran an AI ethics startup in Vancouver. A man in a gray suit with unusually smooth skin and colorless eyes stepped forward. He introduced himself only as Soren. He said this wasn't a think tank. It was something older, something global. You're not here because of who you are, he said. You're here because of what you see that others don't. Then they began the presentation. They showed us footage I can't explain. Time-lapse satellite scans revealing geometric patterns beneath deserts. Seismic pulses forming what looked like signal lattices. Subtle changes in global behavior metrics following specific lunar alignments. At first, it looked like conspiracy pseudoscience, until I realized I was watching a language etched into the mechanics of reality. They called it infralinguistics, the study of meaning embedded in patterns we mistake for coincidence. And the most fluent speakers of this language, according to them, were not human. After the session, I was approached privately. They asked if I wanted to see. I agreed. They led me into a room colder than the rest. Fluorescent lights, a wall of screens. In the center stood a figure in a dark robe, not costume, but ceremonial, almost monk-like. He removed the hood. He wasn't human. At least, not fully. His skin was scaled, though subtly. Not green. More of a matte gray. His eyes had a second vertical blink. His scent hit me before the shock could register, earthy, metallic. He looked at me not with menace, but with profound stillness. A stillness I later learned was ancient. He spoke, but not aloud. I heard him in my mind, a thought voice that vibrated behind my skull. We need interpreters. Your mind is prepared. I passed out. I woke up in a white room, like a high-end clinic. A woman in a dark blazer, human, explained calmly that I had experienced an initiation response. She told me I was free to go, that I could return to my normal life, or I could attend the next session in 2 weeks. I asked her who they were. She said simply, "The custodians." She explained that they weren't here to invade or conquer. They were here to curate humanity, to subtly influence our trajectory, not geopolitically, but psychologically, culturally, philosophically. They see humanity as a species at a crossroads, struggling under the weight of obsolete instincts and emotional programming. I asked if they were aliens. She said, "Not in the sense you mean. They were here before you had names for things, and they never left." 2 weeks later, I was back in Red Deer, trying to act like life was normal. Grocery shopping, cleaning the gutters, pretending like I hadn't met something that shouldn't exist. But I wasn't sleeping. Not like before. I'd wake up between 2 and 3 a.m. every night, like a silent alarm had gone off in my brain. And I kept seeing it. Him. The reptilian figure. Not in dreams exactly. More like residual presence. Like a scent that lingers. I didn't tell anyone. Who could I tell? Then another envelope came. Same gray paper. Same black ink. "Your second debrief is scheduled. We trust your perceptions have begun to shift. Coordinates enclosed." This time, the meeting wasn't in Calgary. It was in a small town near the Rockies, Nordegg. I drove there under the cover of night, heart pounding the entire 3-hour drive. The coordinates led to an old ranger station, long since decommissioned. I parked, stepped out into the cold night air, and waited. At precisely 1 a.m., the trees shifted. A figure emerged. Not human, but not the one I'd met before either. This one was taller, thinner, more angular. Its skin shimmered faintly in the moonlight, camouflage adapting to the ambient light like a cuttlefish. It didn't speak, just turned and walked into the trees. I followed. We walked in silence for 20 minutes, deeper into the bush than any trail should have gone. Then I saw it. A metallic door embedded in a stone outcrop. No lights, no hinges, just a smooth seam. And then it opened. Inside was warmth, humid warmth, like a greenhouse. The walls weren't metal, but something organic, a hybrid of stone and sinew. They pulsed faintly, like they were breathing. This time, the room wasn't empty. There were 3 others, human, like me. A woman in her 40s who looked military. A man with a long beard and a distant expression. And a teenager, maybe 17, hunched in the corner, sketching something on a pad. We were told to wait. Eventually, the lights dimmed. A low frequency thrummed through the floor, and a circular section of the room opened downward, like an iris. From below, 3 figures emerged, each one a different morph of reptilian physiology. One had a flattened, plate-like skull. Another had narrow, bright, golden eyes. The third looked almost amphibian. They called this process convergence. Each of us was given a translucent disc to hold. We were told to stare into it. What I saw inside the disc wasn't a reflection. It was a simulation of myself, but older, changed, standing in a city I didn't recognize, speaking a language I didn't know, leading a group of people I couldn't name. But I felt something deep in my gut. I was working for them. In the months that followed, I attended what they continued to call symposia. But by now I knew it wasn't a think tank. It was a filter, a way to identify minds that could handle long-form influence. They weren't recruiting in the traditional sense. They were seeding ideas. They didn't want power. They wanted architecture, mental frameworks, new ways of seeing. Our ideas, once implanted, would spread like spores. One suggestion whispered to the right developer could become an algorithm. One image placed in the mind of an artist could become cultural myth. One policy leaked into a political consultant's subconscious could shift a nation's trajectory by a fraction of a degree, just enough. I started recognizing others in the program outside the symposia, at airports, at conferences, in passing at cafes, never acknowledged directly, just a glance, a nod. We were everywhere. And yet, no one talked about it. Until the day they gave me my first directive, it came as a dream. Or, that's what I told myself. I woke up at 3:11 a.m. with coordinates etched into my memory. No paper, no message, just knowledge that hadn't been there before. I wrote it down automatically. It led to a remote valley outside Jasper. I hiked there the next morning. At the base of an outcrop, half buried in frost and moss, was a box. Not military, not modern. Something older. It vibrated when I touched it. A low hum that ran through my arm and into my chest. I didn't open it. I wasn't supposed to. Instead, I brought it to a drop site, a seemingly abandoned grain silo outside Olds. I left it on the 3rd floor beneath a false floorboard, just as instructed. That was the first time I realized something. I was no longer working for them. I was working with them. After the first directive, things changed. My professional life, which had always been rocky with freelance gaps and unstable clients, suddenly stabilized. I was offered a consultancy gig at a Calgary-based research firm I'd never even applied to. The pay was excellent, the hours flexible, and the title vague. Systems Pattern Advisor. No one ever really explained what that meant. I'd show up 3 days a week, sit in a private glass-walled office, and review obscure data flows, cross-disciplinary papers, energy grid irregularities, linguistics reports, and sometimes what looked like religious texts rendered into code. Every now and then, I'd get a short message on a secure internal thread. Note the delta in human drift. Tag for reassembly. I didn't ask questions. I learned quickly that my purpose wasn't to understand the whole picture. My job was to thread, to identify symbolic anomalies, shifts in language, imagery, or emotion that signaled subconscious reorientation in the human collective. They wanted to know when humanity was turning a corner, even by a fraction of a degree. And when it did, they moved things, subtly, patiently. A funding grant would vanish. A small publisher would be acquired. A billboard campaign would be rephrased. Not censorship, not violence. Alignment. This was how they worked. 1% nudges, over decades, over centuries, and I was one of the nudgers now. It was late October when I met him. I was walking home from the consultancy's satellite office, just a quiet autumn evening in Red Deer, when a man stepped out of the alley ahead of me. Older, maybe mid-60s, wearing a scarf, slouched posture. But what struck me was his voice. It sounded fragmented, like someone had sliced different tones together and poorly stitched them back. Mechanical, but not synthetic. Familiar, but not organic. He said, "Do you remember when you were 12, Trent? The power outage in Stettler? The sky humming before it happened?" My blood froze. I did remember. The hum, the brief blackout, the way our dog refused to come inside for a week afterward. He said, "That was your first induction attempt. You rejected it, but you never fully disconnected." I asked him who he was. He replied, "I am an echo. I used to be one of you." Then he lifted his scarf and showed me the side of his neck. Not skin, scales, faded, cracked, like peeling lacquer. Burned. He whispered, "Not all of us survived the split." and then he left. After that night, the dreams changed. No longer symbols or coordinates. Now they were memories, but not mine. I saw myself, my face, my mannerisms, arguing in languages I didn't know, living in cities I'd never visited, standing beside reptilian figures like colleagues. Sometimes I was one of them. Sometimes I wasn't even human. I reported this to my handler, a woman who only ever went by Etta. She met me monthly in an anonymous hotel room near Edmonton. She didn't react with alarm, only calm curiosity. She said, "This is convergence. Your consciousness is merging with your adjacent timelines. You're being prepared to operate across layers." "What layers?" I asked. She leaned forward. "Perceptual strata," she whispered. "Reality is written in overlapping edits. Most humans can only read the current version. But you, Trent, you're learning to see the margins, the footnotes, the red lines." It wasn't metaphor. It was real. I was changing. In late November, they took me to an underground chamber in Montana. It was built like an amphitheater, but ancient, stone walls etched with symbols older than language. The place vibrated. Not audibly, internally. My teeth felt it. We weren't alone. They brought in a speaker, an orator, they called him. His face was hooded, his presence overwhelming. When he spoke, I heard two things: the words he said and the frequency beneath them. A second speech, embedded like a carrier wave. That underlying frequency didn't speak in words. It spoke in urgency, in images, in cellular instruction. After the ceremony, I blacked out. When I came to, I had nosebleeds for 3 days. I couldn't remember anything he'd said, but every time I saw a headline, or watched a corporate commercial, or overheard a conversation, I understood something behind it. Language had changed. Not the words, the substrate of words. I could now hear the programming under the noise. And I knew who had put it there. I stopped dreaming in images. They became structures, blueprints, grids. I'd wake up not with visions but with schematics in my mind. Ideas I had to sketch before they disappeared. Complex frameworks of thought. Systems that seemed to optimize the way meaning traveled through human communication. Not words. Geometry. I brought these drawings to my next meeting with Etta. She reviewed them with no surprise, only mild approval. Then she said, "It's time to meet your instructors." She drove me 4 hours north to a private estate hidden near the Athabasca River, a compound surrounded by pine, fog clinging to its perimeter like a moat. Inside, the air was sterile, metallic. We entered a white chamber, no light fixtures, no furniture. They emerged from the walls, not walking, not hovering, just appearing, as though space itself had folded to accommodate them. 3 beings, 7 feet tall, no eyes, no mouths. Smooth, charcoal-gray skin that shimmered like graphite. Their heads were elongated and lacked detail. They had no identifiable face, and yet they were watching me. They didn't speak. They didn't move. But I knew they were instructing me. Thoughts began to appear in my head, not like dialogue, but like a download. My memory expanded. Concepts I'd never learned unfolded instantly. How to shape influence without detection. How to seed ethical divergence into cultural loops. How to write in the margins of human cognition. They didn't train me like a mentor. They rewrote me like software. When I left the chamber, I felt different. My thoughts moved faster. My emotions muted slightly, but with greater clarity underneath. And for the first time, I felt like I wasn't fully Trent anymore. 6 weeks later, I received a new assignment, this one sanctioned by the public face of the organization, a think tank known as the Alias Group. On paper, it focused on global trend forecasting, ethics in emerging technologies, and climate meta-modeling. Publicly funded, academically affiliated. In reality, it was a distribution hub for influence. I was placed on a team of 5. None of us used last names. We reviewed public policy drafts, global health campaigns, and neuro-interface prototypes before they were released. Our job wasn't to approve or deny. Our job was to steer. We'd insert small modifications, wording shifts, symbol choices, icon placements, music tone recommendations in public safety videos. The public never knew, but they felt it. They absorbed it. That's how influence works. Not by force, but by familiarity. Reptilians understood that far better than any government. I worked there for nearly a year before I realized the others weren't entirely human either. Not all of them, at least. That winter, I was summoned to Ottawa. Not publicly, not officially. A private jet, no passenger manifest. Landed late at night. Unmarked car met me on the tarmac. The meeting took place 3 levels below the Canadian Parliament building, a part of the structure not listed on any blueprint I've ever seen. 2 men were waiting, both in suits. One was clearly reptilian. His skin couldn't completely hold the camouflage under fluorescent light. The other might have been once human. His gaze didn't blink correctly. They told me I was there not for instruction, but for evaluation. They asked questions I didn't answer out loud. They read my stress responses, my subconscious movements, the slight dilation of my pupils. One of them placed a hand on the table and spoke directly into my nervous system. Your structure is holding, but strain is accumulating. Your emotional ties must be severed soon. I asked what that meant. They said, your family, your friends, all hold outdated reference maps of you. If allowed to persist, they will fracture the overlay. They meant I was becoming something unrecognizable to those I loved, and it was time to disappear. I didn't fake my death. That would have been messy, unnecessary. Instead, I orchestrated a gradual fade, a social exit strategy they called non-linear offboarding. You don't vanish overnight. You fragment. You slowly become irrelevant to everyone who once knew you. I stopped replying to emails, let friendships lapse, closed my social accounts, took a sabbatical from work, canceled old habits, moved twice. The second time, no forwarding address. People assumed I was depressed, burned out, probably living somewhere off-grid. In reality, I was living in a new grid entirely. They gave me a new residence, hidden in the folds of the eastern slopes of the Rockies, half-subterranean, climate-modulated. A small team maintained the property, none of whom ever spoke to me directly. It was here I completed my integration phase. I don't know how to describe it clearly. The process is part neurological, part symbolic. They induce a resonance in your memory architecture. They call it alignment attunement. Your past doesn't disappear, but it reorganizes around a different center. I stopped seeing the world in cause and effect. I started seeing it in intentional fields. And that's when I was told the final phase of recruitment was beginning. They no longer called it training. At this stage, they referred to the process as refinement, not of skills, but of thought itself. Human cognition, they explained, was built on obsolete scaffolding, binary choice, narrative framing, ego binding. What they offered wasn't new information. It was a new way to host information. For weeks, I was submerged, figuratively and almost literally, in a chamber they called the Quiet Array. It was a spherical room, soundless and dimly lit, lined with hundreds of triangular nodes that pulsed in sync with my heart rate. I would sit in the center and let my thoughts dissolve. The process was unnerving at first. My mind fought it, clinging to old loops, to familiar fears, to linear logic. But eventually, those thoughts wore out. The loops softened, the edges of my identity blurred. Then came the frames. Visuals appeared, without screen or source, drifting across the periphery of my mind like submerged lanterns. Cities I'd never seen, machines made of language, beings not bound by skin. These weren't visions. They were concepts with gravity. Every time one passed near me, I felt myself pulled, like a tuning fork vibrating to a frequency not my own. I learned to ride them, to align. And one day, the room opened. Standing in the doorway was Soren, the man who'd first greeted me in Calgary. But his skin no longer attempted full disguise. The edges of his reptilian physiology were showing. Faint scales along the neck, eyes no longer simulating true irises. He said nothing. He only nodded. I had passed. The Reptilians don't live in underground cities. Not exactly. That's a misinterpretation. They live parallel, not below. There are locations, dense, nondescript buildings, bunkers, even museums, where the external structure is human-facing, but internally, the geometry folds. Step through the right corridor, and you're no longer in Edmonton or Seattle or Berlin. You're in their real infrastructure. They call these places interfacilities. I was taken to one beneath Vancouver, a brutalist shell above ground. But once inside, it unfolded into a structure of glowing obsidian, dense fog, and non-Euclidean hallways. The gravity felt different. Time didn't tick. It simmered. There were humans there, yes. About 50 of us, moving slowly through the space, engaging in tasks I couldn't fully explain. Some were mapping patterns onto spherical data cores. Others were conducting long, silent rituals involving symbolic geometry drawn into light. At the center of it all, a black monolith suspended vertically, with notches etched into its surface that moved when no one looked directly. I wasn't told what it was, but I knew. It was a memory structure, not for an individual, but for a species, and I was now one of its custodians. Eventually, I was assigned to what they called contact layer. It's where the interface between human society and the reptilian infrastructure is maintained, delicately, silently, invisibly. I became what people might call a handler, though that word feels too aggressive. I wasn't controlling anyone. I was observing, suggesting, guiding. I would identify high-potential individuals, scientists, artists, technologists, who were unknowingly building toward architectures the Reptilians desired. I never lied. I never coerced. I simply asked the right questions. I met a quantum linguist in Toronto and helped him redirect his research toward symbolic compression. I spent 3 months mentoring a teenage coder in Vancouver who later built an AI music platform that, unknowingly, echoed the infralinguistic harmonic grid. I guided a filmmaker in Banff toward an archetypal narrative structure that opened viewers to a deeper emotional resonance the Reptilians had been testing. All of it subtle. All of it inside the framework of normal life. And not once did any of them suspect. They felt inspired. Like the ideas had always been there, waiting to bloom. And in a way, they had. But not everything went cleanly. One night, I received an urgent internal ping. An anomaly had been detected in Winnipeg. A former candidate, someone who'd been evaluated years earlier and rejected, had begun broadcasting a podcast series full of nearly accurate speculations, hybrid memory matrices, reality scaffolds, reptilian observation nodes. Too close. Too fast. I was sent to intercept, not physically, but informationally, to redirect his energy into benign territory. I reached out anonymously, posed as an ally, encouraged him to reframe his theory as metaphor, to call it fiction, to go deeper into the creative realm. It worked. Mostly. But something about him lingered. He had a strange resistance, not to influence, but to integration. His thoughts didn't stabilize. He kept circling the same ideas, growing more unstable, more erratic. 2 weeks later, he vanished. I asked Etta what had happened. She simply said, "Sometimes the signal fractures the host." That was the first time I questioned if the reptilians always meant well, or if well was just another shape in their geometry. I made the mistake of asking Etta if the reptilians had gods. We were walking the perimeter of a remote observation facility near Lake Minnewanka, just the two of us, surrounded by low cloud and pine trees that bent with a strange kind of tension, as if the air itself was heavier there. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she picked up a pine cone, turned it in her hand, and said, "They don't worship, they align." I pushed further. But do they believe in a higher intelligence, a creator, a source ? She paused, looked at me for a long time, then said, "They believe intelligence is recursive, that what we call source is not at the beginning of time, but at its convergence." It took me months to understand. The reptilians don't look up. They look forward and inward at once. They see the universe not as a story, but as a shape coalescing toward complexity, toward coherence, and they believe that conscious alignment with that shape is the closest thing to divinity. They don't pray. They design. They don't kneel. They resonate with frequencies emitted from deep memory cores in structures hidden beneath sites we once called sacred, the Valley of the Kings, the Gobi Crater, and one buried directly beneath the Athabasca Glacier. They believe humanity is on a threshold, and their role is to make sure we cross it correctly. In the spring of the following year, I was taken to a location they called the Final Memory Room. It wasn't easy to get there. A week of preparation, a shift in diet, sleep cycles recalibrated, symbolic dreams implanted to soften the neural corridors. Then came the transportation. Blindfolded, escorted, submerged in sound for hours. When I arrived, the room was nothing like I expected. It looked like a child's bedroom. Warm light, soft wooden walls, a single desk, a mirror. I was left alone. No instructions. After nearly 20 minutes, the mirror began to ripple, not like water, but like the space between dimensions was stretching. Then, I stepped through. Or rather, I saw myself stepping through. Not current me. An older version, worn, hollow-eyed, marked by something ancient and reptilian beneath the skin. That version of me looked into my eyes and said, "You've already agreed." And then I saw everything, every memory I hadn't made yet. Every choice I would pretend was mine. Every word I'd one day say that was, in truth, seeded. I saw the full arc of my recruitment and realized it wasn't recruitment, it was activation. I had been born into this role. The invitation wasn't the beginning, it was the final step. Weeks passed, or maybe months. Time blurred. Then came the reversion test. They removed me from everything. No signals, no contacts, no assignments. Placed me in an anonymous apartment in downtown Calgary. I was told to live like a normal human again, to engage, to blend. But I couldn't. The world no longer spoke in the same register. Conversations sounded thin. News cycles looped like crude theater. People's emotions flickered like projections cast from a flickering bulb. I saw sub-patterns in every streetlight sequence. Every crosswalk felt like a command. They watched me closely, monitored everything. My body language, heart rate, micro decisions. After 40 days, they asked if I wanted to return. And I said something I hadn't expected. I never left. They briefed me on my final purpose. It wasn't infiltration. It wasn't surveillance. It was assembly. They gave me a list, names, locations, contact phrases. I was to travel across provinces, cities, even countries, to meet them one at a time, not to tell them the truth, but to activate them. Each one had been seeded, like I had, each one unaware, but nearly ready. I visited a retired botanist in Lethbridge, a night janitor in Toronto, a nurse in Haida Gwaii who sang old sea shanties in a dead language. All of them carried a piece of something ancient, something interlaced with reptilian memory, but masked as instinct. I didn't recruit them. I reminded them. I said one phrase, always different, always specific, and each one, upon hearing it, changed. Not visibly, but deeply. They didn't speak afterward. They simply nodded. And I moved on. By the end of the year, I had activated 12. They told me I was part of the final stage, human resonance replication, a kind of cognitive quorum. What happens when all of us reach alignment at once? I was never told, only that it would be soon. They never used the word end. Not once. What they said was threshold. The moment when enough minds had been attuned, not controlled, not enslaved, but brought into resonant coherence. The final convergence wasn't about domination. It was about completion. In early autumn, I was summoned one last time to the Athabasca site, where the trees grow thick enough to hide a building in plain sight. I passed through 2 rings of biometric security, neither of which scanned fingerprints or retinas. Instead, they scanned rhythm, pulse, thought cadence, decision speed. They said I was ready. I was brought into a circular chamber, newly constructed, gleaming obsidian and copper. The air buzzed, faintly musical, as if the entire structure was humming just below the audible range. There were no reptilians in the room. Only us. 12 of us. The ones I had activated, plus a few I had never met, but recognized instantly, like pieces of a code reassembling itself. We did not speak. We did not need to. The instructions were in us now. We stood in a ring around a recessed spiral etched into the floor. A black liquid shimmered within it. Not water, not oil, something else. It pulsed like a slowed heartbeat. Then the light changed, and something from beneath began to rise. Not a creature, not a machine, but a shape that folded and unfolded simultaneously. It was logic made form, symbol as structure. I was no longer Trent. We were no longer individuals. We became a conduit. After the threshold protocol, I was no longer given directives. I wasn't watched. I wasn't pinged, because I didn't need to be. The program was now inside me, an autonomous rhythm running parallel to my original consciousness. I could still function in the world. I still shopped for groceries. I still waved to my neighbors. But beneath that, I was something else. Not fully reptilian, not fully human. Something assembled. I started seeing new layers of reality, not just patterns but prompts. Conversations triggered inner feedback loops. Images whispered. Cities pulsed with embedded guidance. It wasn't hallucination. It was signal clarity. And yet, I still remembered my parents, my ex-wife, the long drives through Saskatchewan, the smell of winter on a windshield, the taste of burnt coffee during 4 a.m. consulting shifts. That haunted me. Not because I missed it, but because I realized I had been engineered to remember. Remembrance itself was part of the interface. Humanity was not the vessel. It was the binding agent. Then came the whisper campaigns. Not ours, but the ones we watched for. Scattered articles, fictional podcasts, fringe theories gaining traction. More and more people claiming to have seen beings in their dreams. Individuals across the globe suddenly obsessed with symbols they'd never learned. Architects drawing reptilian motifs into skyscrapers. Coders embedding snakes into idle screen animations. Children humming melodies that matched infralinguistic frequency curves. We didn't stop it. We just tracked the curvature. That was the moment I understood. We weren't leading humanity into something. Humanity was leading itself. The reptilians weren't masters. They were editors, custodians. And those of us who had joined them, we were like shepherds of a language that had been spoken beneath the world for millennia. Now, finally, the surface was starting to listen. Then, everything went quiet. No contact, no pulses, no directives. The systems didn't fail. They just receded, like a tide pulling back before a wave. For 6 weeks, nothing. I remained in my house in Alberta, winter setting in. The sky felt thicker. My dreams went blank. Every instinct I had told me something was building. Then, in the dead of night, the signal returned. Not to my devices, to me. It was a hum in my bones, a wordless pressure across the front of my skull. I sat upright in bed and felt a single phrase drift across my consciousness, etched not in voice, but in certainty. You are now the mirror. I didn't know what it meant. Not yet. But I would. You've already seen it. The shift. You think it was just social change, generational divides, algorithm drift, political confusion, the rise of AI. The odd sense that no one's really piloting anything anymore. That's not failure. That's transition. We didn't crash the world. We tilted it. By degrees, through culture, through timing, through influence so subtle you'd call it luck. Why do people talk in rhythm now? Why do memes spread like glyphs? Why do songs feel less like entertainment and more like summoning? You think it's just the internet. It isn't. It's us. And we didn't arrive yesterday. We were already here. If you've made it this far, if this message found you, then I need you to understand. You're already inside it. This isn't a story. This isn't a confession. It's an activation. And maybe you felt it, somewhere in your spine. Maybe you've dreamed of doorways that weren't there yesterday. Maybe symbols have started appearing in your sketchbooks, your notes, your private thoughts. Maybe you hear that low pulse at night, just under the hum of the fridge, or the heater, or the stars. It's not madness. It's resonance. And whether you choose to follow it or not, we'll know. We always do. Years have passed. I no longer keep track of how many. Seasons change, yes, but they change differently now. Not by temperature or calendar, but by tonal shift. Reality bends with new rhythms. Memory drifts more easily than it once did. And time. Well, time is not so much a line anymore. More like a loop folded inward. a Mobius script printed across the architecture of perception. I still look like Trent Laurance. That's the outer face, gray hair, lined skin, ordinary gait. But beneath the surface, I am not what I was. I've become something distributed. My consciousness now exists across multiple points of observation, embedded within locations and systems both digital and organic. I no longer need to be present to influence. I have become ambient. You wouldn't notice me in a crowd. That's the point. We're not meant to be seen. We're meant to listen, to recalibrate, to rewrite from within. The reptilians don't speak to me anymore, not in language. They left after the threshold was completed, or maybe they just dissolved into their next phase. Maybe they never really existed the way we thought. Maybe reptilian was just a shape, a symbolic interface, like a cursor on the screen of human evolution. They were the pressure, not the authors. The authors were always us. There's a new layer of reality now, subtle but accessible. Most don't know it's there, but they feel it. A rising sense of interconnection, a new way of knowing, an unspoken consensus that begins in the chest and vibrates outward like a soft magnetic pull. Children are born already fluent in it. They don't ask what things mean, they ask where they fit. They feel the shape of thought long before they express it. The internet shifted, language bent. Music became a carrier for instruction, less about art, more about orientation. Not obedience, not hypnosis, but calibration. We seeded it gently. Now it grows on its own. Even resistance was part of the design. Rebellion, chaos, paranoia, all accounted for. A species cannot evolve under perfect peace. It must generate friction, push against its own future until it sharpens. And now, here we are, standing at the edge of coherence. There are still a few of us, older now, quieter, not leaders, not prophets, just watchers. We don't give orders. We observe deviation. We reinforce the deeper patterns when they begin to fray. Sometimes I pass another in the street, and we exchange a look. That's all it takes. Some of us live deep underground, in libraries that hum with stored resonance. Others live among cities, walking circuits mapped long ago. One of us lives in orbit, tethered to a relay station built from ancient instruction, disguised as defunct tech. We are not immortal, but we are recurrent. Our thoughts outlive our bodies now. Our patterns persist. You might mistake us for folklore, ghosts, echoes. You'd be wrong. We are the margin walkers, the threshold keepers, the resonance custodians, and we are still building. There is one final shift coming. We don't know what to call it, only that the signs grow more visible each cycle. We call it the Horizon Event. Not an apocalypse, not a rupture, but a final harmonization, where the symbolic and the literal merge, where thought becomes place, where maps stop being necessary because navigation itself dissolves. At that moment, something older than the reptilians, something behind even them, will emerge. Not a god, not a species, but a format, the true format of existence. The original signal, still echoing forward from outside time. When it arrives, it won't speak. It will replace speaking. To you, the listener. You've heard my voice now, through these words, through this vibration. Maybe your breath slowed as you listened. Maybe your pulse synchronized with something hidden between the syllables. That's how you know it's real. If you feel unsettled, that's good. It means your layers are shifting. It means you're reachable. It means you were always meant to hear this. And maybe, just maybe, You'll see the invitations soon. They never arrive as letters anymore. They arrive as recognition. A pattern you can't unsee. A feeling that something has been whispering to you since birth. A knowing. And when it's time, you won't need directions. You'll already be inside.